practice.
Oh, great.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. My name is Kirsten Bayer, and I'm with the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support. I'm on for tech support today, along with my colleague and presenter for today's session, Molly Cook. So thank you for joining us for this Workforce Wednesday webinar, taking initiative and being accountable. We're excited to spend the morning with you, and we appreciate your time. Couple of housekeeping things before Molly gets started and pulling up her slides here is that this session is being recorded, and we will have the recording on our Illinois Workforce Academy website as well as Illinois WorkNet. It typically takes about 48 working business hours to get the recording up. So sometime on Friday morning, you can expect to see the recording. You will also receive a follow-up email tomorrow that will have a follow-up survey in it, and we ask for your feedback on today's session, as well as if you have any other topics for future Workforce Wednesday webinars that you would like to share with us. We would love to hear any other topics that the field feels there's a need for, and we can pursue those for professional development. So if you please take that follow-up survey for the WIOA Professional Development Committee. We do look at those and compile them. I can vouch for that because I'm the one who does it on the WIOA PD committee. And then we also want to reiterate that we are on Zoom webinar today, not Zoom meeting. So you might not be familiar with this platform, but the main difference is that you as an attendee cannot turn your camera on and you cannot unmute yourself freely. So we will have an opportunity for Q&A at the end of Molly's session. And so you can feel free to post in the chat or in the Q&A. And we can address those questions and facilitate them for Molly. And then you can also feel free to raise your Zoom hand when we stop for questions, and we can unmute you if you would like to ask a question live. So it's just a little bit more of a controlled environment, but you still have the ability to ask questions live if you would like to. We also have closed captioning on today, so I went ahead and turned that on now for accessibility reasons. So feel free to turn that on for either accessibility or note-taking purposes. And then we're going to start off with our Workforce Wednesday webinar beginning polls. So we just want to highlight these to kind of for our analytical purposes. Again, the WIOA Professional Development Committee does look at these. So if you could go ahead and share with us, where's your local area this morning? If you're from Chicago, Northern Illinois, Central or Southern Illinois, or if you're joining us from statewide, out of state. And then which partner do you best represent? Do you best represent Title I, Title II, Title III, Title IV, or another WIOA partner or stakeholder, or if you best represent a state or local workforce innovation board, just so we can kind of get a feel for who our audience is today. So we'll give everyone about 15 more seconds to answer both of those polls. You should be able to scroll down. There is a PowerPoint that you can, we had Nisa type in the chat. Is there a PowerPoint that we can print to take notes on? There is, Nisa. I'm going to put that PowerPoint as a PDF in the chat here momentarily. As soon as I hand the reins over to Molly, I'll get that in the chat for all of you. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and end that poll and share the results. Looks like we have a good array of people spanning across the state. So good representation across the state, both from up north in Chicago and Northern Illinois, as well as Central and Southern. We even have 3 people joining us from statewide, which is awesome. Thank you. We appreciate your time. And then we have a good span of Title I and Title III, as well as sprinkled across the other titles and other WIOA partners as well. So thank you all for joining us and participating in those beginning polls. We do appreciate it. And then I'm going to hand it over to Molly to start her presentation, and I will get her slides in the chat for all of you. And I'll be here if anyone needs anything. Feel free to chat me privately if you need any tech support or have any questions following today's session.
Great. Thank you so much, Kirsten, and welcome everyone. I'm so glad to be chatting with all of you today. I'm Molly Cook, and I have a consulting business called Extended Capacity Consulting, and I work with Kirsten at the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support as a workforce evaluation consultant. I also work with nonprofit agencies and universities on grant writing, reporting, and implementation, as well as research. So today we're going to be talking all about taking initiative and accountability, which I know all of you do in your work within the area of workforce. And so I want to start just with some opening conversation and reflection on the current work that we do. So thinking about accountability, imagine that you're reading oh, Kirsten just said you can't see my slides. Oh no, okay. I'm going to reshare them and hope that you see them this time. Do you see my slides now?
Yes. Sorry, Molly. I thought you were just gonna pull them up when you started talking, and I was like, oh, she doesn't know we can't see them.
No, that's so funny. Okay, well, I'm sorry for all of you who didn't see the slides with the poll questions on them. I just was over here doing my own thing. I guess I never hit share. So there we go. Okay, so talking about accountability, imagine that you're reading a job description where that involves accountability. What are some words, phrases, or ways that you may see accountability or taking initiative described in that job description? So which words or synonyms to accountability and taking initiative can you think of that you may see in a job description? So if you want to go ahead and type some of those in the chat box, we'll take a few minutes to do that. That would be great. I see self-starter. Proactive, able to work independently, leader, problem solver. Yeah, these are great. So go ahead and keep adding those. And I also added some in here just that I think of when I think about taking initiative and being accountable. So driven, time-oriented, self-motivated, reliable, organized, team player, communication skills, meets and exceeds deadlines. So looking at these words and the words that you all put in the chat box, taking initiative and accountability can come up and work in lots of different ways, but fall under each of these different umbrellas. And I'm sure we all do this in our work. So I have a poll here that I want us just to, again, think about as we start to dive into this content. So if you were thinking about your job and if you were to write your own job description, or maybe you remember what your job description was, would taking initiative be included in that job description? And I think Kirsten just put that poll up on the screen. Okay, we'll take about 10 more seconds on this. Perfect. So, I kind of thought this would be intuitive, but I wanted to confirm that yes, all of us need to take initiative and be accountable in our work. How that plays out may be a little different, but today we are all going to be project managers. We're all going to think about when a task, a project, a team initiative comes our way in our work, what that looks like and what taking initiative and being accountable is at each step in that process. Today we'll discuss a project life cycle, knowing ourselves, working with teammates, and creating work plans to get our work done. We're first going to start by walking through the project life cycle, which looks at the phases of a project from initiation, planning, execution to closure. And as we think about the project life cycle, we'll start in phase one, which is initiation. So imagine you get assigned a project, a task, you're considering a new job, you get assigned a report. This could be a multitude of different scenarios. So in the first phase of taking on a project, leading with this idea of initiation and accountability, you're going to want to start by asking yourself these questions you see on the screen first. Who, what, when, where, why, and how isn't here, though when I did reading classes in first grade, they always had the how. But you're going to want to start by asking these questions. So as you get assigned a new task, project, who do I work with? What are the personalities I work well with? What is my communication style? Who else is involved in this work? And we'll go into each of these further in the preceding slides. What questions do I have about this project? What is the content area of it? What needs to be done? Where are we going to be completing this work? On Zoom, in person, in the field? Where does this work occur? when, what are timelines, due dates, deadlines, etc. And why? Why is this work happening? Why is it important to me? Why is it important to the team I'm on? And what is the purpose, goal, and vision for this work? And how do my values, vision, passions align with it? Now, this may seem sort of basic of asking these who, what, when, where, why questions, but I found oftentimes I want to start by giving a little background. The work I do with ICSPS is I am a staff member to work groups and committees of the Illinois Workforce Innovation Board. And so when I first started, I would, get assigned a committee to work with, and I would just dive in. I found that asking myself these questions first, who's involved, why are they involved, what is the point of this work, why is it important, really helped to not only create and complete the work, but also to have a background and understand who I'm working with better. So I want to start with the who. The who is you. So, when you take on a job or a project, oftentimes maybe you don't have control if you're taking on that job or project. Maybe it's assigned, maybe you do. But it's very helpful to come in with an idea of what you're bringing to the table and what your lens is. So asking, what do you value and what are your skills? I recently saw this list of values on, it's through Dare to Lead, which is a book by Brene Brown. They have all sorts of resources and worksheets on their website. And I actually recently started a work group, and someone shared this and said, in this particular group, we're all coming in to discuss, in this particular work group, it was homelessness. And we all have different angles. Some of us are coming in to work to enhance data collection. Some of us are grant management. Some of us are the on the ground project implementation staff. But we all come with a lens and why this work is important to us and why this work matters to our daily work, to our lives. And so they shared with us this list of values of these are values that may come up in how you interact with others or how you value others interacting with you. And we just went through and started circling which of these values apply to us. And I found this to be very, very helpful because it shows how I show up in a group and how I often perceive others will show up as well. So, for example, a huge thing on mine that I circle here is accountability. I really like to know that when someone says they'll take on something, that they have that, and I like to do the same. Another item was collaboration. I thrive working with others and learning feedback from others. I like the feedback. I've worked with people who they love to collaborate, but feedback can be given in a way that isn't maybe the way I typically give feedback. I may go through and start editing a report and just marking it up with suggestions, but my teammate may find it more helpful if I schedule a meeting to go through suggestions. So going through and especially if you're working on a team, knowing what your values are in your work to be able to share that with someone and explain what your lens is and what you value in work, but then also be able to recognize that in others can create great collaboration on projects. Now I see someone listed in the chat, can our personal values and work values be different? Yeah, definitely. 100%. And I think the word value could be, I'm now second guessing my choice of the word value. I think it can be a little bit confusing because in your personal life, you may have your values in terms of causes or interest areas, whereas what you value in work could be the way that others present themselves and work with you. Like I said, I value accountability. I value collaboration. In my personal values may be a little different. They may be more focused on causes. I see there's two other items in the chat I'll check on. Oh, good morning. Good morning. Yeah, so keep asking questions as we go. And as I see them on slides, I'm happy to answer those. So next on our startup phase, we have the why. So again, if you're getting a project assigned to you at work, if you're taking on a new job, taking on a new report, why do you care about this topic? Now, sometimes the answer to that question is going to be really easy. I am currently, one of the work groups I staff on the IWIB is the Continuous Improvement Committee. And the why is really, really easy for me to answer on that. I care because, we do this work because we want to work with job seekers, and we want them to have the best access to job seeker services as possible. So continuous improvement is key. That's really easy. Now, sometimes it may be harder. I may be working, I'm trying to think of an example, I could be working on a report for something in an area that I don't typically work in. I may not be as familiar with the topic, or it may just be a report that needs to get done. The why there is trickier, but at least others have showed me it's a lot easier to motivate yourself, follow through on work when you can figure out how it fits into the bigger picture. Next is team. So why is this topic important to others, your team, your funder, whoever it happens to be? Why is this work happening and why is it important? What do other people think about it? Just a little story about this. So I mentioned before that something I do quite a bit is grant work. And for any of the rest of you who work under grants, on grants, do grant writing, reporting, or implementation, it can get heavy. It can be, like we said, a lot of reporting or requirements. And sometimes it's easier for me to see the deadlines than to remember the bigger picture. And I was in a meeting a few weeks ago, and again, just like thinking about deadlines, very time oriented. I mentioned before, accountability is big for me, which means I'm like a time driven person. I see the deadline, I see the details. And I was just focusing on the deadline. And we stopped and we were in a meeting with a funder, and the funder said, this work is really important to me because I had a family member very close to me who experienced homelessness. And so I'm in a position where I can now be a funder of this work, support other agencies doing this work, and it's really important to me. And it really helped me to remember to recognize that, the work we do is rarely insular, and it matters to the people we're working with on different levels. And it's not always going to be a personal experience. It could be as much as like, this matters to me because I want to do a good job, because I want to do the best work and I want my work to be reflected in that way. But it's helpful, especially on the days when we're burned out, to try and zoom out and find out why this work is important, not just to you or your team, but in the larger scheme of things. Finally, community. And I don't know if community is the right word here. I was trying to find these one word phrases. So you might find a different word than community. Let me know if you do. But why now? So why is this work being done now? So, I'll go back to this example of the continuous improvement committee that I have the opportunity to work with. Why is this work important now? And this particular work or group provides input on many policies and processes and procedures that impact the workforce system here in Illinois. And so each time we're looking at a policy, for example, often the question is why now? And there's many reasons for that. But it helps to understand why this work is urgent and important. Okay, so once you've looked at yourself, you've asked the why of a greater project, the next is to think about the when. So this has to do, again, with any report, project, job you have. So when we get assigned for tasks, it's helpful to understand the timeline. And these timelines, we may have no control over. It could be a timeline, you're given it, and for whatever reason, that's the timeline with no control. A question I often ask is there any flexibility with that timeline? Not because I might use it or even need it, but it can be really helpful to learn, okay, is our hard deadline September 6th? Or is the goal September 6th with an opportunity to extend a couple of weeks? Something that really helps while working with teams is calendars. So if your colleagues are comfortable with it, I know the team Kirsten and I are on, our colleagues share their calendars, and some people may have an exact meeting listed, some people may just write busy, but it's really helpful to see the calendars of my colleagues because it's easier to schedule meetings. It's easier for me to make sure I'm respecting their time. For example, right now on my calendar, it shows that I'm on a Workforce Wednesday webinar. So no one is trying to schedule meetings with me right now. I also like to use my calendar, and there's a picture here. This is not my calendar. Obviously, it's also from 2020. I'm seeing this is just something I found online. Kirsten here is really amazing at this as well, of using your calendar as a tool to be able to predict and schedule your time. Now, here you can see someone has like answer emails time, video call time, project tasks time. And sometimes it's like, this is more of an estimate. I may say that I'm going to work on XYZ report from noon to 1, and then it takes me to 1:30. But it helps to be able to project what you have happening in a day, understanding when you're going to get it done, and taking your to-do list and taking it a step further and showing how it will happen on your calendar. I think we just had someone raise their hand, Christine. So if you did have a question, Christine, I'll take you off mute. Did you have a question? Okay, well, if you have a question that you think of, Christine, go ahead and type that into the chat and we can go ahead and get that answered for you. Okay, so going back to the timeline again, having access to others' calendars can be really helpful for scheduling meetings and not having to email to be like, oh, can we all meet, Wednesday at 2, wait for responses, and also then to use your calendar as a tool. This can also help with what I call resource availability. So, for example, and we'll talk about this more in a minute, if someone says, okay, can we get, this report done by Tuesday at 4? Looking at your own time, your own resources, your own capacity, and being able to project out your work to see if you can actually meet the deadline being requested can also be very helpful, not just in predicting what you can do, but how others can assist. So next we have the what. So what is the work? What is the content area? What are we doing? So whenever getting assigned a new report, project, work group, committee, it's really helpful to ask, what do I know and what do others know? So this is something that I've had to learn recently, and it can be a little bit challenging to learn, I think, for some, including myself, is the what do others know piece. So often, we're not the first ones to work in a particular topic area. Others have done it before us. Others may have ideas on how to create a meeting structure, how to plan for a report, what sources to use for a task. So before I start a project, I like to ask myself, what do others know? And reach out. I think sometimes reaching out can be scary to ask someone for their ideas and opinions, but I try to remember that when others reach out to me and say like, oh, I remember you did this such and such project last year. How did it go? And like, what would you suggest? I love it. I love it when people reach out. I like to be able to feel that puts more meaning to my work, being able to, again, use it to hopefully inform additional work. It gives me a chance to connect with another person, and I love that. So asking someone else what they know or what their experience has been with a project, an organization, a topic, they have the choice to say yes or no to your request for asking what they know, but it never hurts to ask. And then what do you know? What resources do you have? What have you done in the past that could be helpful or similar? And what access to additional resources do you have? And the next point I have is, what clarifying questions do I have? And again, when diving into a new project or program, it's easy to just look at the requirements, look at the final outcome, and start moving, especially if we're on a timeline. It never hurts to ask clarifying questions, and oftentimes it may save us and others a lot of time to be able to get a really firm understanding of what a funder, a supervisor, etc. may be wanting of your work. Finally, are there past reports, resources, or content to review? This may be as simple as like a Google search. It may be that you need to reach out to others who you work with or in your network to ask if there are similar reports, resources, content to review. I know in academic work, this is a literature review. I'm not saying you need to conduct a full literature review every time you take on a project, but it can be helpful to see what others have done in this area that you're working on. I do see there's a question in the chat from Mark about what calendar do we use? And does everyone at ICSPS use the same calendar application that Kirsten answered? And so, yeah, we use Outlook, and we all use Outlook. Now, I work with other agencies that use Gmail and Google Calendars. That works. With pretty much all of these different calendars, you can invite people to meetings, which is helpful. You can decide the visibility of your calendar. You can share it with others or not. I've also seen people use Calendly, which can be really helpful. I don't use it, so I'm not going to be able to speak too in depth of how it works, but on the user end of it, a person's calendar is online and you can schedule a meeting time with them, and that's super helpful, and it just shows busy or available. So those are some ideas. I'll put Calendly in the chat if anyone wants to look it up. Maybe some of you already use it. I see we have another question. It looks like, let's see here, somebody raised their hand here. It looks like it is Maria. Maria, I'm going to click ask to unmute. So if you'd like to ask a question, you can go ahead and unmute and ask it, or you can put it in the chat. Okay, Maria, if you think of a question, go ahead and just put it in the chat and we can definitely make sure we get to it. Okay, so I want to pause for a second and learn from all of you because I think you all have some great ideas as well. So before you take on a project, a job, a role, a report, what steps do you take prior? And you know what? I need to add a caveat here. Sometimes it may feel like there's no time to take steps prior. It's like, this is due tomorrow. We just got to get it done. So here I'm assuming that you have a timeline that's maybe a couple of days out that you have time to do some of this pre-work. And then are there any steps that you wish that you did take? So if you could just take a minute in the chat to give us all some ideas, because I'm sure you all have great resources, great ideas, and I'd love to hear what you do. It looks like, what is my capacity? That's a great question. That's a great question. Organize my timeline. Yes, we'll talk about that. We're also going to talk about later, which is something that is definitely a learned skill. I'm still in the process of learning it, of when I ask myself, what is my capacity? And my capacity is none, 0, or 97% full. Learning how to communicate that in a way that's kind, thoughtful, a team player, yet also clear. It's really hard. We have review calendar prior. Yes, I love that. Set priorities. Yes. Being prepared to the best of my ability. The setting priorities piece that Novella just mentioned, this is something that I have a colleague who does this, and it sounds really interesting to me. So I'll throw it out there as an idea. She has, a list of priorities written down by her desk each day. And those priorities might be really specific in a week, like so-and-so is due by the state. Some of them are sort of her guiding principles to her work. So make sure that I spend 1 hour a day reading about whatever the topic happens to be. Spend 1 hour this week connecting with a colleague. And she uses that to then almost as a decision-making matrix to determine what she says yes to and what she says no to. Again, there is a level of, you have control over some of these things, and some of them you just have to do. But I thought that was really interesting. Monica reads all available documents about the project. Yes, there can never be too much. I agree. Though some of the documents are so long. I would replace read with skim in some of the cases. But yes, look at all of the available documents about a project. Yeah, exactly. Okay. So now we're heading into phase 2 of our project implementation timeline, which is the planning phase, which is the timeline phase, which I know someone just put in the chat of organizing my timeline Novella. So our planning phase. So a tool that can be used in the planning phase is called a project charter or overview. This can be called a million things. Project charter, overview document, project plan, whatever you want to call this, but it basically lays out what your project will be. This is probably not going to be a step you take when you're working on a smaller task that you're working on solely, but if you're working on a team, this can be a really helpful tool. So this is what we do whenever we start a new work group or committee. And on the left, you'll see some of the components of that project charter or overview. So getting really clear about what our deliverables are. And these projects may have one clear deliverable, such as a report, such as a policy, such as a program. It can be really helpful, especially when working on teams, to break that deliverable down into smaller deliverables. So for example, if your final outcome is to create a report on the state of the workforce system in Illinois, you may break that down to say, okay, literature review, surveys, document scan, assemble the team. Breaking it down into those little deliverables first makes sure that the whole group is on board with what needs to get done. It creates less of a funnel at the end of squeezing tasks in. And it also allows us to celebrate some of those small incremental deliverables on the way to show progress to ourselves, to our teams, and just to sort of celebrate all we've done so far. Another aspect are our objectives, which could be framed as objectives, charges and priorities, goals. So what is your overall goal as you're working to reach these deliverables? There may be a few goals. Who are the interested parties? This was something I used to, I think, gloss over, but now I'm realizing how important it is. And it goes back to our who question earlier. Who is everyone who could be interested in this? Let's say in the example of the report, in this report. These are people I should be making sure that I either check in on prior to see what resources they have, send a draft copy of the report to for feedback, asking for ideas, but at some point in the process, checking in with each of these interested parties. What's our timeline, our budget, our scope? The scope question is super important because what is our group or our project looking to accomplish? And again, that's sort of like that example I shared with my friend where she has the list of her priorities written down next to our desk. Our scope allows us to know what we can say yes and no to, and when we're taking on more than we can with a project. Who are our team members? And again, using as much as possible an equity lens and making sure that we have the right members at the table. If we're part of the team who's forming our group. And there are some really great resources I can put in the chat later. There's a report by the Equity Task Force on Illinois WorkNet about utilizing an equity lens. There are some materials on how to gather a team that is representative of the work you're doing. So I'll give an example. We recently worked on a policy group. And so as we did that, we listed all of the interested parties, made sure to have a representative from each of those, looked at geographic representation from throughout the state. We looked at sector representation. And so, there are a lot of different categories you can look at to make sure that you're getting as representative of a group as you can. You can also look at risks. So, are there any risks in your work? And this could be risks as to what could slow down your timeline, what could be, maybe you have to get some approvals for your work that could take longer than projected, but to sort of have an idea of those in advance and see how much, if at all, those can be mitigated. And then finally, success criteria. How will you know your work was successful? And trying to get as specific on this as possible, because at the end of the day, you want to know that you accomplish what you set out to accomplish. And that helps you to, again, along the way, evaluate your own progress and work that's been done. Okay, so we do have a question in the Q&A box of, as far as interested parties, how do you handle a situation where someone identifies as an interested party, but another person doesn't agree? Okay, I'm going to give an example of to what I think this is, and then please correct me if you meant something differently. So let's say that you're working on, we'll use my example from before, a report on the state of the workforce in Illinois. Also, I'm sure there are many reports on this. I'm just pulling out a random example. So this is not based on any reports that do exist. So you're working on this report and you're looking at all of the interested parties and you make your list. And a party, some organization comes to the table and wants to either be a part of your work group, your task, your project, and wants to be involved in this work. Another person on your team perhaps says, no, they're probably not the right group to be involved in this work. How do you handle this situation? I think there's a couple of different ways to handle this. I think the first is to look at, if the easiest way, which is probably not how it always happens, is if there is something that would be blocking this party from this work regulation wise. So like, for example, if you're on a funding project and there is a conflict of interest. If there's nothing that's like a steadfast rule on that, I think it's probably, it's one of two things. It's whoever is funding this project or overseeing this project or assigned this project, deferring up to them. If there isn't someone above the project, then I think it would be a group decision. I don't know if that answers your question so specifically, though. I think it will largely depend on the organization, but I'd love to hear other people's thoughts on this or ideas for this question. So if you have additional thoughts or ideas, or if I misunderstood your question, please put that in the chat. Please put other ideas. I think the others probably have great ideas about this as well. Mark, you put to put a link to the equity. Yes, so I will do that towards the end. I have to pause my share when I do that, and then I'll put a link to the Equity Task Force report, which describes an equity lens, into the chat. And that's a really great report. So I will do that toward the end, and I'll pause my screen and then share that link. So the last item I want to go through with the planning phase is, again, if you don't have time for a project charter or overview, on the right here in these images are sort of the 4 key items to look to in the planning phase. The vision, mission, this could be your goals, objectives, the point. What is the point? Creating a structure, which is what we'll talk about next. So making sure all this work gets done. What's our structure? Creating deadlines for yourself and your team, and then determining your budget, your staff, and your team members. How do we predict how much time something is going to take us? And this quote is, a cognitive quirk called the planning fallacy leads us to consistently underestimate how long it will take us to complete a project. This isn't all of us. It may just be some of us. This is something for me. I always think it's going to take me shorter than it does to do something. I'll say, oh my gosh, I'm going to get on. I did it with this presentation. I'm not going to lie to all of you. I sat down to create it and I said, oh my gosh, I am going to spend 2 hours creating this presentation. And then, you know what? It took me a little longer because I went down rabbit holes, or I got emails, or whatever it is. I always underplan time. Maybe some of you overplan. Maybe some of you are excellent at predicting how long something will take you. This is just strictly my own curiosity. If you could use, I'm looking on mine. Okay, if you could raise your hand just so I can see. How many of you, like me, tend to under predict how long something will take you? So you think it'll take you shorter than it actually does? Most of the time, not always. I'll give you a little, as you're answering, I'll give you a little quirky anecdote. My sister ran a marathon this weekend. She's very cool. She ran a marathon and she's an excellent time predictor. She told us what time she would be at each aid station and she arrived on the 2nd. I wish I could do that. That was amazing. Okay, so it looks like several of you struggle with this like me, which is comforting to hear, if nothing else. So that's great. We're going to go into more now about how to address that. So I'll lower my hand. Okay, so as we do, part of looking at this time is understanding what time you have available and how you need to prioritize your time. So as we dive into this discussion, we talked a little bit about before, let's say that you do find that a project or a report is taking you longer than you thought, or it's just taking you the time you thought it would, which is a long time. you get asked to take on another project. That project bumps up against this deadline, and maybe this project is your biggest priority and it needs to get done. How do you express your capacity in a way that shows initiative and accountability? You don't have to answer this right now, but if any of you have ideas, we'll talk through some that I've found online or been taught by others. But when you do find that you're at capacity, how do you share that with others in a way that is sensitive, kind, but also assertive in setting a boundary for yourself? So this is a question to consider. Please, if you have ideas, put those in the chat, but we'll go through a few right now. On the left side of your screen, you'll see a few ideas of, these are from mentors, online resources, a few ideas of how to express our capacity when we've reached it. So a few ideas of statements are, I can complete X by X date. To do my best work on it, I would need until X date. Now, don't get me wrong, people are going to tell you no to this, especially if you're on a project where you're not the lead. They might say, oh, I'm so sorry, but like it has to get done. It just has to. This might not be the right statement sometimes. This is an idea for your toolbox when it is the right time. Another one is, I can take on X project. Whenever I put X, I guess this is my inner algebra coming out. Whenever I put X, that just means fill in the blank. So I can take on X right now, but we'll need assistance with X. My plate is full with X, Y, and Z until September 22nd. After September 22nd, I will have capacity to take X on. Or does anyone have capacity to assist with X by X date? So as you're looking to predict for yourself, while keeping in mind that sometimes we underplan how long something will take us. So you may need to add a cushion, if you think an assignment or task will take you an hour, maybe giving yourself an hour and a half. But when you're thinking about and projecting how much time you have with the amount of work you have with setting a deadline, I posted this matrix here. This is something we started using new on our workforce team during our staff meetings to be able to, one, communicate with our team about the work that we currently have on our plate, learn if there's any work we could ask for help with, and then just for ourselves to look at our week and planning our to-dos and priorities. It's called the Urgent Important Matrix. And actually, I first started using this several years ago. I worked in an organization where we had a lot of interns on our team, and we had these weekly meetings to talk about our work. And this was a matrix that one of our interns brought as an idea, and it worked great there. And so, we're using it on our workforce team currently. So what I might do at the start of the week or prior to one of our team meetings is look at my calendar and say, okay, what is happening this week that is both urgent and important? The term they use here is crisis. It might not be a crisis yet, but just like, what are things I'm working on that are urgent and important? So these might be things that have deadlines tomorrow, the next day, this week, have to get done. This is where most of my focus is going to lie this week. What are things that are important but non-urgent? These are things like goals and planning. So this might be if you're in a role where you set budgets, maybe it's July and your budget is due in December. You have to start talking about this now, but it's not due tomorrow. Our third quadrant are things we're working on that are not important, but that are urgent. So these are interruptions. I think a better way to describe this that I often substitute for is things I can delegate. So there are things that have to get done, but they're not the most essential to the work I'm doing right now. So these are things I could ask for help with or delegate. And then finally, our work that isn't urgent or isn't important is a distraction. Now, this is not necessarily quadrant for work that's been assigned to you that you feel is not urgent and not important. You might just have to do it. But this would be like, for example, if you're like, I'm trying to think of a really good example. Okay, I'll give an example. Our group was looking for a while at the best way to share information that we're working on with each other. This probably could have been an Excel sheet or a Microsoft Word document that we could have created really quickly. I one day got down a research tunnel of looking at like these intense project management systems and these, reading article upon article about how to share information with your team. The team had identified that like a Microsoft Word document was great, I just got down a little research hole of all the other ways we could do it, which was not a priority. So that would be an example of that work. This is a really awesome resource. I highly recommend it. Okay, so I'm looking in the chat and I see we have a couple of notes. So I see that one idea was focusing on what is important is great. If something is urgent that is not life-threatening, it may be an indicator that was not considered back when it was only important. That's a really great point. We also had a note about, this is going back a couple of slides, regarding what happens, the question about what happens when someone feels that they are an interested party, but others may disagree. And it should be taken seriously, Mark noted. A conflict of interest, like we noted, looking to sort of rules, conflicts of interest is going to be our first starting point. It may result in including that person, but asking they abstain from voting. If the disagreement is based on a personality or a fear, there may be an actual benefit to including rather than discluding the person. So yeah, we would use our rules. And actually, I think the rules you may be referring to there, Mark, I have on a slide. So I'm in a group with Mark and we have some community agreements we use in our group and we're going to go over those. So thanks for those comments. Those are really helpful. Okay. So, we just went through how we plan for time, how we express our capacity, how we look at what we're working on, and how we share that with our team. So let's talk about more of the nitty-gritty details of working with a team. And I sort of debated on slides here. Kirsten gave a great presentation a couple of years ago on small group dynamics, different personalities in a group. It would be another great webinar. It would be a whole webinar though. So I'm trying to give a short synopsis of what we do with working with a team. And again, Kirsten has given great presentations on this in the past. So when working with a team, it's important as we can to be able to really understand our strengths and the strengths of others. This can be helpful because number one, if you're facing a challenge or you're facing that you're running into a roadblock in your work, there may be someone on your team who really excels at the thing that you're struggling with, and that's a great resource for you. We also tend to all do better work when we're working to our strengths. So there are a lot of ways to try and understand the strengths of your teammates. These may happen really informally, where you notice that, one of my colleagues, she always is amazing at taking PowerPoints and making them look great and figuring out how many words should be on a slide, designing them. She always volunteers to take on that work. She does a great job. That strength has kind of naturally come out. There's also ways you can do it a little more structured or formally. So for example, I put a few tools here we'll go through. I've used these on various teams in the past to understand my own strengths and sharing them with the team. One is StrengthsFinder. Some of you may have done this. And I put a picture here of all of the different strengths. They fall into 4 key areas of strategic thinking, relationship building, influencing, and executing. But it shows in rank order from 1 to 5 what your strengths are and how that might show up for you on a team. So for example, my number 1 is a learner. And I'm looking for where learner here. Okay, so it's a strategic thinking one. So learner, I love to learn new things. I love to see how something fits into the bigger picture. You may have figured this out from this presentation. It really helps. This is one tool. It does cost money. So that can be definitely a barrier to using this tool, but I wanted to provide it as an idea or a sample. Another tool is called 16 Personalities. This is free and it's based off of the Myers-Briggs test if you've ever heard of it, but it's, in my opinion, more fun and also free. What it does is there are 16 personalities. Again, it's broken down into analysts, diplomats, sentinels, and explorers, and the colored boxes are all of the different types of personalities you can get. So you take a quick test online, I think it's like 15 minutes, and it lets you know which personality you are. It comes with a free report of how you thrive in a workplace, your strengths, who you work well with. I think it's great just to understand yourself. It's an idea for your team to do. It's really fun. The reports are interactive. They tell you which celebrities you're like, which can be like, unnecessary but fun. So that's one resource for you. And then finally, this was the tool I talked about earlier. On a team, it can be really helpful to have community agreements. So we do this with our work groups and committees, many of them, and they vary by committee. I put an example here of what one community agreement looks like, but it's something that we establish early on in our meeting history as a group. And we think about, how do we want to work together as a group? How do we want our meetings to look? And how do we ensure that we are as inclusive as possible? So, for example, in this community agreement, we have examples like using first person first language, assuming positive intent, sharing the floor, explaining acronyms and jargon, remembering that we know a lot together. So if I don't know something, my teammate might. No such thing as a silly question, respect lived experiences. And we root many of our meetings in these community agreements, even if it may be we're repeating them each meeting, just to center ourselves and remember how we work together and what it looks like when we work together well. Okay, we're through phase 1 and 2. So now we're into like getting the work done phase. I am so sorry, this is showing up a little bit blurry on my screen. It was not blurry when it was teeny, but now that it's large, it's a little blurry. So I'll walk you through this image as it's challenging to see. So in our implementation phase of our work, this is where we're really digging into our plan. We may take that project charter we created and break it down further into, as you see on this example, activities, timeline, responsible staff, and deliverable. You can do this, and I believe this is my next slide here. Oh, it's 2 slides from now. We're going to go through in 2 slides how you can do this on a practical level, the tools and technology that you may use, but creating a project implementation plan among your team with what needs to get done when will have it feel less scrambled. It'll also have it so that you know what you're responsible for and you know what your teammate is responsible for. It eliminates some of the uncertainty around what you're supposed to do and who owns what, and just makes that really clear. Here's an example of that execution phase of a filled out and completed work plan or task list. And so here, this was for a work group I was on several years ago regarding creating an evaluation framework. And so we had here a description of our activities that needed to be done, the activity itself, the deliverable that would come out of it, and then the target due date. And we looked at this at least quarterly over a year process, typically monthly, to see where we're at with this. I put in blue font here other ways you could frame this or other words you may see above it. So, this was our charge. You could also call it your mission. The description of our activities could be called a driver or anchor. Activities could be expected outcome. However you word this, it again helps to focus your work in a theme, in a mission, in a timeline, and in deliverables. And of course, we like to think of these not so much as never changing. You may need to adjust these with your team as you go, but having a clear agreement as a team on a work plan, a timeline, and tasks can make sure everyone's on the same page and also gives everyone a voice. Even, sometimes in a work group, I may be coordinating the work, but I really want to make sure everyone on the team is on board with the work plan and the timeline and also gives feedback to it because other people may have different ideas about processes and timelines. Okay, so these were the tools I had mentioned. So as you're creating these work plans, creating these timelines, you need to be able to share these effectively and create updates with your teams. And so I put here a few resources that we utilize. Maybe you utilize others, and I'd love for you to put those in the chat if you do. So a tool we rely heavily on is Microsoft Teams. You might use Google Chrome, or I'm sorry, not Google Chrome, Google Drive. You might use another platform, but just a basic document sharing platform. We love to tag people in tasks to be able to ensure they're seeing updates. We put our Excel sheets with documents that change and to do live edits on Teams to allow us all to work in a common workspace rather than emailing as much back and forth. What I've done in some groups, which has been liked by some, disliked by others. So you'll have to feel out your team and see what they think are calendar invites for deadlines. So I'll give an example. A colleague and I are presenting at a conference in a couple of weeks. There were a lot of deadlines that had to go along with that. Like we needed to get the presentation to the conference by a certain date. We needed to have it rehearsed by a certain date. So we sent each other calendar invites of those timelines of just like, okay, August 26th due to the conference organizers. I find that really, really helpful because then it's on my calendar. It's there. I'm not going to forget it. I have the timeline there and we know that we both understand it. This might be annoying for some, so you'll just have to feel it out on your team. I listed Google Drive as an option. We use that. On one work group, we've used GroupMe, which is a text app and allows you to text through the app. And this is really helpful if you're organizing like a conference or a meeting with a lot of people, something where you need to communicate with your planning team easily. And we do that through the GroupMe app with like, you know, for example, someone's needed at this room to help set up this presentation. That was effective for us. Another item that has been effective that I've used on other teams is what we call a stand-up meeting. Could be a 15-minute check-in meeting, but the point of these meetings is they're brief, they're to the point, they're often more frequent than like a full-blown meeting. So it might be, you know, every Monday of the week, you are with your team for 15 minutes to say, here's something going well for me, here's something I'm struggling with, here's a question I have. And with quick fill-in or updates from your team, can happen on Zoom, can happen in the office, could be an email even, but just like a quick and frequent check-ins for how things are progressing and how can we solve these together. One of my colleagues I work with on lots of work group and committees, we meet at the same time every Tuesday just to look at what we have coming up that week and what we need to, you know, any roadblocks we may be having. There are some Tuesdays we don't have to have that meeting where we say, you know, I think we're in a good spot and we cancel it. But by having it on our calendar every week, it's a built-in checkpoint that we use most of the time. The final tool I wanted to show was called a run of show. And so we used this in one of the groups I was on. It was a really cool tool. I can take no credit for it. It was someone I worked with started it, and I think it's great. So I put an example of it at the bottom of the screen. And so this was primarily for Zoom meetings or Zoom presentations. If I was presenting today with someone else, I would have made it. So it looks at when you're, you know, coordinating a multi-part training, multi-part presentation, looking at what time you want to cover certain topics, who's presenting, who you're passing to next. So for example, if I had been presenting with Kirsten, I might say, you know, after the tool slide, I'm presenting to Kirsten, who's going to speak next. That reminds me. What technology aspects need to be occurring, if any, and what other notes we have. This was a really helpful tool when we had multiple people running meetings that were longer with a lot of moving parts, so we all understood our roles. It seems as though if you assume your team all understands their role, not everyone knows. We need to like really spell it out for all of us. You know, I find a lot of times I think I know my role, but I'm not sure, and then I'm questioning it. It really just helps us all to be on the same page. Okay, and so this is the final in the implementation execution phase of a project, the final part that could be a helpful tool, which is work groups. So again, if you're working on a big project, a big report, there are a lot of people involved. You may need to be working in smaller groups outside of your big group meetings to get the work done. Now, again, work groups are where a lot of the details happen, and the role of work groups may be to do some of this work and then present it up to the committee. So this is a tool that, again, was shared with me for how to structure a work group and make sure your work group stays on task if you're completing work outside of the larger committee meetings. So first, organizing the information that you're looking to review or update, exploring what you're reviewing to see what works and what can change. This might happen through in your group, focus groups, feedback, revisions, surveys, etc. Discovering what changes can be made short, mid, and long term, and what partners you need to make those changes. Selecting the changes that you would like your larger group to see. Acting through piloting the priorities and beginning your work, and then evaluating what's been working. And this was a really helpful tool as we started up work groups to focus on the work at hand and then guide the work as a framework. So I just wanted to be sure to share this with you. Okay, so a note on leadership. let's say that you're the leader of a project or report, you're the project manager, whatever you happen to call it. A few notes that I saw again in that Dare to Lead project packet, which I shared one resource, I have a quote here. A few notes on how it can be helpful to lead a project. First is check-ins. So checking in with your team, whether that's sending a quick email to the whole team and saying, how's everyone doing today? Here's where we're at in the work plan. How's it going? It may be check-ins individually with each member of your team. Might not be possible if it's a team of 50. It might be check-ins with the work group, but it's been recommended, especially in these leadership resources, that check-ins are important and scheduling them regularly so that people have that built-in system to ask questions and receive report. Agendas, creating agendas for big group meetings can be really helpful in setting those out in advance for various learning styles so that those who like to prepare in advance have a chance to review the agenda and come to the meeting prepared. Those that are super time oriented understand how the meeting will be structured. It's also can help with accessibility quite a bit. And then, on those agendas, writing the goals for the meeting and any next steps on the agenda at the end of the meeting that you're either writing them or reviewing them with the group. What are our takeaways? Who needs what? And what are our action items going away from this meeting? A final thing, and I put this here, I wasn't really sure where to put it, is pilot testing. So if there is time, it can be really helpful to pilot test a report, a program, a project. What that might look like for a report, a pilot test might look like sending it out for review. What it might look like for a program is starting it with a small group, because that continual improvement, a test, learning what needs to be sort of changed and revised, brought back to the group can be really helpful before launching something at a larger scale. And I've learned from other leaders that testing something in whatever way you can on a small level and then revising can save some extra steps down the road. I learned that just from others. So, okay, we're to our final phase already of our project, the closure phase. So what happens is we're wrapping up a project. Most importantly, evaluating progress. If you can, we really try to do this. I forget. I think this is one isn't easy for me to forget. But for example, after a meeting, if there was a big meeting, sending out a survey or an email and asking what went well, what could be changed. If there's, a conclusion to your work group, again, what went well, what could we change? Having that formal check-in process, whether it's just an email, a conversation, a survey, to remember and learn for the future. How can we make this work even stronger? A really important question is, should this work carry on? And if so, how? So, especially if you're in these work groups that are like a 1-year time duration, did you get done all the work that you needed to get done? Or did you find more work that needed to get done along the way? And how does this work carry on? And if so, how? And who do you share that with? Again, the member evaluations, like we said, how were the members of this group impacted by this work? What would they do the same and differently? And then again, as much as we can, expressing appreciation. If someone does an awesome job, noting it. It helps with affirming people, especially those who maybe that is really effective for them. It makes them feel good. It makes us all feel good, and affirming that hard work. Nissa noted in the chat that providing agendas and PowerPoints are very helpful for individuals who are neurodivergent. So yeah, it's really helpful. That requires a little more planning too. Like if you're a project leader, make sure that you build in that time to your time frame of getting a PowerPoint or an agenda out 24 hours in advance as much as you can, because it does help the whole. Okay. So with that, I wanted to end with that closure piece and looking at how we evaluate our work. It's been so helpful to speak with all of you today. For me, I've thought of some ideas. You've shared with me some ideas. And we have some time for Q&A at this point about the content we've talked about. If any of you have ideas to the content that we've discussed, I'd love to hear those ideas and thoughts. So we have some time for questions, comments. Feel free to use the chat or to raise your hand. And I'm going to pause and share that resource I mentioned, the workforce equity report in the chat. So go ahead and ask any questions while I'm pulling that out. Okay, I'm going to put this in the chat right now. You should all be able to see it.
While Molly is doing that and giving you guys some time to think of questions, I just wanted to reiterate that today's webinar is recorded and we will have it up on our Illinois Workforce Academy website as well as the Illinois WorkNet website. And the link to where the recording will be housed at will be in your follow-up email tomorrow. So you'll receive a follow-up email from Zoom and it will have that link where you can access the recording and the presentation slides from today. Just a reminder, the recording does take about 48 working business hours to edit and everything before we post it. And then you'll also have access to the slide deck. I did go ahead and put the slide deck in the chat though, which I'll do that again right now. So that way, if you want to download it, you kind of have access to it right away. And then also there's a follow-up survey in your follow-up email, and we do ask that you go ahead and take that. There's some questions regarding today's session, as well as an opportunity for you to let the WIO Professional Development Committee know of any future topics that you would like access to or more information on. You guys are all out in the field on the front lines, and so we want to know what you need so we can be able to provide that professional development on those topics.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kirsten. I don't see any questions right now. So I had my contact. I'll put my chat or my email in the chat. If you think of anything, I'd love to hear your ideas too. So if you had ideas on any of the things we talked about, love to hear it. And yeah, that's there if you need any follow-up.
Great. So I just want to take the opportunity to thank Molly. She is a part of the ICSPS team. We've kind of adopted her as she's also a consultant with her own consulting business as well. And so we just love working with Molly. And so we just appreciate her presenting this amazing information today about project management and just all of these tips and tools. Definitely try some of the tips and the websites and kind of just like the project management process out and let Molly know kind of your successes and maybe some failures as well, because that's how we learn, right? And so, yeah, I just want to thank Molly and thank you everyone today for spending your morning with us. We do appreciate your time and we hope you found this session valuable. And everyone's just kind of thanking you, Molly, in the chat. So if nobody has any questions or anything, I'll go ahead and close us out. Thank you again for your time and have a great rest of your Wednesday, everyone.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.